The judge's gavel struck with finality, silencing the bustling courtroom. A disheveled man stood before the bench, his weathered face partially hidden beneath an unkempt beard, wearing tattered clothes that hung loosely on his thin frame. The room was thick with judgment, eyes boring into the back of the defendant. "State your name for the record," Judge Michael Reeves commanded, barely glancing up from his docket. "Staff Sergeant James Callahan, United States Army, 68 Walluk Combat Medic, sir." The words came out clear and precise, a stark contrast to his appearance. The judge's pen froze mid-notation. He slowly raised his head, eyes narrowing as he studied the man's face. Recognition dawned, followed by visible shock. "Doc Callahan?" the judge whispered, his voice barely audible. Without warning, Judge Reeves rose to his feet. "This court will stand to attention," he ordered, his voice breaking slightly. Confused murmurs gave way to the sound of benches scraping as the entire courtroom rose, witnessing something none had ever seen before. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from and what you think will happen next. And if you want more stories that touch the light within your heart, like this video, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell. Welcome to In the Heartlight. Let's begin. 3 days earlier, James Callahan awoke to the rumble of traffic overhead. The concrete support beam of the Highway 40 overpass had been his headboard for the past 8 months, longer than he'd stayed in any one place since becoming homeless 3 years ago. He opened his eyes to the familiar sight of his tarp ceiling, stretched carefully to shed rainwater away from his sleeping area. Despite his circumstances, James maintained a meticulous living space. His few possessions were organized with military precision. Clothes folded in tight rectangles, medications arranged by schedule, and his most precious possession, a waterproof bag containing his military documents, medals, still in their boxes, never displayed, and a laminated photograph of his former unit, stored safely away from the elements. James sat up, wincing as his right knee protested. The old shrapnel injury always flared in cold weather. He checked his watch, a sturdy military-issue timepiece that had somehow survived years of hard living, and noted it was 5:43 a.m., still following the military schedule ingrained in him over a decade of service. "Morning, Doc," called a voice from nearby. Martin, another homeless veteran who'd claimed territory under the same overpass, was already awake and warming his hands over a small camping stove. James nodded in greeting. "Forecast?" he asked simply. "Bad one coming. They're saying thunderstorms by nightfall, possible flash flooding." Martin had a small battery-powered radio that kept them informed of weather conditions. Critical information when you lived outdoors. James frowned, eyeing the concrete slope that channeled rainwater away from the highway. During heavy storms, it became a rushing torrent that had nearly washed away his camp twice before. "VA appointment today?" Martin asked, offering a chipped mug of instant coffee. James accepted with a nod of thanks. "Supposed to." 10th attempt to get my medication adjusted. He didn't mention that the previous 9 appointments had resulted in rescheduling, lost paperwork, or hour-long waits, only to be seen by yet another new doctor unfamiliar with his case. After a sparse breakfast of protein bars, purchased with the money he'd earned collecting aluminum cans, James carefully shaved, using a cracked mirror propped against his backpack. Even homeless, he maintained certain standards. The face that stared back at him looked decades older than his 36 years. The VA hospital was a 7-mile walk. James started early, his gait slightly uneven from the knee injury. He carried only the essentials: ID, VA paperwork, and a bottle of water. The hospital's antiseptic smell hit him as he entered, a scent that triggered both comfort and anxiety. This was familiar territory from his medic days, yet now represented a system that had repeatedly failed him. "Mr. Callahan?" the receptionist called after he'd been waiting for 2 hours. "I'm afraid Dr. Winters isn't available today. We'll need to reschedule you." James absorbed this news without visible reaction, though inside, something fragile threatened to break. When? He asked quietly. We have an opening in 3 weeks, she replied, not meeting his eyes. 3 weeks. His medication would run out in 5 days. Is there anyone else who could see me today? I'm almost out of my prescription. His voice remained calm, respectful. I'm sorry, that's the earliest available appointment. Her tone made it clear the conversation was over. James nodded and left without argument. He'd learned that showing frustration only made things worse. Outside, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, earlier than forecast. He wouldn't make it back to the overpass before the storm hit. James walked toward downtown, mentally mapping public buildings where he might find shelter. The library closed early on Tuesdays. The bus station had recently hired security guards who removed anyone without a ticket. The church shelter was on the other side of town. As the first heavy drops began to fall, James spotted the abandoned Carson furniture warehouse. The building had been empty for years, windows boarded up, no trespassing signs faded by sun and rain. A section of plywood covering a side window had partially pulled away, enough space for a man to slip through if necessary. James hesitated. He never broke the law intentionally. But as lightning cracked overhead and rain began to fall in sheets, survival instinct overrode principle. He glanced around, then quickly slipped through the opening. Inside, the cavernous space was dark and musty. Water dripped through holes in the ceiling, creating pools on the concrete floor. James found a dry corner and settled in to wait out the storm. He didn't touch anything, didn't disturb the space. He would leave as soon as the weather cleared. He didn't intend to fall asleep, but exhaustion from the long walk and the disappointment at the VA pulled him under. He dreamed, as he often did, of Afghanistan. The dusty outpost, the explosion, the screams of wounded men, his hands moving automatically to apply tourniquets and pressure bandages, the metallic smell of blood mixing with cordite. The flashlight beam in his face jerked him awake, heart pounding. Police, don't move. An officer stood over him, hand on his holstered weapon. James raised his hands slowly, the trained response of someone who understood the danger of sudden movements. I'm not armed, he said clearly, just seeking shelter from the storm. Stand up slowly and keep your hands where I can see them, the officer instructed, radio crackling as he called for backup. James complied carefully, his movements deliberate. Officer, I apologize for trespassing. I intended no harm. I'll leave immediately. A second officer arrived, flashlight sweeping the area as if expecting to find accomplices or contraband. ID, the first officer demanded. James slowly reached for his pocket, narrating his movements. I'm reaching for my wallet in my right front pocket. The officer nodded, still tense. James produced his ID along with his VA card. You're a veteran? The second officer asked, tone softening slightly as he examined the cards. Yes, sir. Army? 3 tours. The first officer, his nameplate read Daniels, seemed unmoved. Building owner has a zero-tolerance policy for trespassers. Too many break-ins lately. I understand, James replied. I didn't take or disturb anything, just needed to get out of the storm. Officer Daniels sighed. Look, I get it, but I have my orders. Eleanor Winters has filed too many complaints about trespassers. Turn around, hands behind your back. As the handcuffs clicked closed, James felt a familiar emptiness. Not anger, not even resignation. Just the hollow recognition that this was how things were now. The respected combat medic who had once saved dozens of lives, now arrested for seeking shelter from the rain. You have the right to remain silent, Officer Daniels began as he led James to the patrol car. The holding cell at the county jail housed 8 men that night. James sat quietly on a bench in the corner, back against the wall, observing rather than participating in the restless conversations around him. He'd been processed efficiently, fingerprinted, photographed, personal belongings cataloged and stored. The charge was criminal trespassing, a misdemeanor, but still serious enough to warrant jail time given the property owner's insistence on pressing charges. Morning brought the appearance of Sarah Mitchell, a public defender in her early 30s with an overflowing case file and dark circles under her eyes. "James Callahan?" she called, consulting her clipboard. James stood. "Yes, ma'am." She led him to a small interview room and gestured for him to sit. "I've been assigned your case, criminal trespassing, first offense." She flipped through papers. "Arraignment is scheduled for tomorrow morning." James nodded. "What should I expect?" "Normally first offense with no priors. I could probably get this dismissed with community service," she explained, still scanning his file. "But the property owner, Eleanor Winters, is apparently making an example of you. She's been after the city to address homeless people using the building during bad weather." "I understand," James said quietly. Sarah looked up, really seeing him for the first time. "It says here you're a veteran?" "Yes, ma'am. Army, combat medic." "That might help with the judge," she made a note. "Any chance of character references? Someone who could speak to your service?" James shook his head. "My unit? We've lost touch. Most had their own struggles after coming home." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. She'd represented enough veterans to recognize the pattern. "Any family who could help?" "No, ma'am. Parents deceased, no siblings." "How long have you been homeless, Mr. Callahan?" 3 years, 2 months. The precision of his answer caught her attention. "And before that?" "Worked as an EMT for a while after discharge, then hospital orderly. Couldn't keep it together. The PTSD made steady work difficult." He spoke matter-of-factly, without self-pity. Sarah's phone buzzed with a reminder of her next appointment. She was already running late, with 7 more clients to see before the day ended. "I'll do what I can, Mr. Callahan. The arraignment is at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Try to get some rest." As she gathered her papers, something made her pause. Maybe it was the dignity with which he held himself despite his circumstances, or the clinical precision of his answers. Whatever it was, she found herself asking, "Your service record? Anything I should know that might help your case?" James hesitated. "I received some commendations, nothing special." Sarah made a mental note to request his military records. Veterans often downplayed their service, but sometimes those records contained information that could significantly impact a case. "I'll see you tomorrow, Mr. Callahan." That evening, in her cramped apartment surrounded by case files, Sarah found herself dwelling on James Callahan. Something about him had stuck with her. His quiet dignity, the contrast between his current situation and the discipline evident in his demeanor. On impulse, she opened her laptop and searched his name along with Army Medic. The first few results were generic, but then she found an article from an Army publication dated 7 years ago. Her eyes widened as she read. Staff Sergeant James Callahan, awarded Silver Star for extraordinary heroism. The article described how Callahan had treated 23 wounded soldiers and 11 civilians during a 72-hour period after their forward operating base in Afghanistan was attacked, working without sleep in a makeshift field hospital after the medical facility was destroyed. Further searches revealed more articles, including one mentioning that Callahan had never appeared to receive his medals formally. Sarah sat back stunned. The homeless man in her case file had saved dozens of lives under the most extreme conditions imaginable. And now he was in jail for seeking shelter from a thunderstorm. She reached for her phone and dialed a number. "Dad, it's Sarah. I need to ask you about a veteran named James Callahan. You served in Afghanistan around the same time." By morning, Sarah had a much clearer picture of who James Callahan was and a burning determination to ensure justice was served properly in his case. The county courthouse was bustling with the usual morning activity when James was led in with 3 other defendants. He wore the same clothes from his arrest, now wrinkled from 2 nights in jail. Despite this, he stood straight, his military bearing evident. Sarah Mitchell waited at the defense table, unusually alert for this early hour. She'd been working phones since 6 a.m. "Mr. Callahan, I've learned some things about your service record," she whispered as he sat beside her. Why didn't you tell me about the Silver Star or the Bronze Star with Valor? James looked uncomfortable. It's not relevant to this situation, ma'am. It absolutely is relevant, she insisted. But before she could continue, the bailiff called for all to rise as Judge Michael Reeves entered the courtroom. Judge Reeves, a stern man in his late 50s, known for running an efficient courtroom, took his seat and began working through the morning docket. When James's case was called, he approached with Sarah beside him. Case number 2023 CR 1457, Commonwealth versus James Callahan, charge of criminal trespassing, the clerk announced. How does the defendant plead? Judge Reeves asked without looking up. Not guilty, Your Honor, Sarah responded. And we request consideration of special circumstances. The judge looked up, impatient. Miss Mitchell, this is a straightforward trespassing case. What special circumstances could possibly warrant the court's additional time? Your Honor, if I may, my client's background and service record. Miss Mitchell, being a veteran, while commendable, does not excuse breaking the law, the judge interrupted. Does the defendant understand the charge against him? Yes, Your Honor, James answered. And your name for the record? The judge asked, pen poised to note it. Staff Sergeant James Callahan, United States Army, 68W Combat Medic, sir. The military precision in his response was automatic. The effect of these words on Judge Reeves was immediate and profound. His pen froze mid-notation, and he slowly raised his head, studying James's face with newfound intensity. Doc Callahan? He asked quietly, almost to himself. Then something unprecedented occurred. Judge Reeves rose to his feet. This court will stand to attention, he ordered, his voice carrying a slight tremor. Confused murmurs filled the room as people hesitantly stood, unsure what was happening. The prosecutor, Richard Collins, remained seated for a moment, bewildered, before rising with the others. Your Honor? He questioned. Judge Reeves ignored him, his focus entirely on James. Staff Sergeant Callahan, my son was Lieutenant Thomas Reeves, 10th Mountain Division, Helmand Province, 2014. Recognition flickered in James's eyes. You saved his life during the attack on Forward Operating Base Griffin, the judge continued. He had a collapsed lung and arterial bleeding. You operated on him in a bunker under enemy fire. The courtroom had gone completely silent. You kept 23 soldiers and 11 civilians alive for 72 hours with minimal supplies until evac arrived, Judge Reeves said, his voice thick with emotion. My son told me that when medical supplies ran low, you used your own uniform for bandages and gave your blood directly to 2 critically wounded men. James stood rigidly, his eyes fixed on a point above the judge's head, the stance of a soldier receiving commendation he felt undeserving of. Your Honor, Richard Collins, the prosecutor, interjected carefully. While this is certainly remarkable, we do have a docket to consider. Judge Reeves turned to him with uncharacteristic sharpness. Mr. Collins, the man standing before you is the recipient of the Silver Star and Bronze Star with Valor. He saved my son and dozens of others. I believe we can spare a few minutes to acknowledge that properly. Collins fell silent, properly chastised. Staff Sergeant Callahan, the judge continued, may I ask how you came to be in these circumstances? For the first time, James's composure wavered slightly. Life after discharge proved challenging, sir. The transition was difficult. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward. Your Honor, if I may, Staff Sergeant Callahan has been attempting to receive proper treatment for severe PTSD and physical injuries sustained during his service. His records indicate 9 canceled or rescheduled VA appointments in the past year alone. His most recent attempt was the day of his arrest, when he was turned away despite running low on essential medications. The storm hit while he was far from his usual shelter, and he sought temporary refuge in the abandoned building. From the gallery, a woman in business attire stood. Your Honor? Eleanor Winters. I'm the property owner who filed the complaint. The judge nodded for her to continue. I'd like to withdraw my complaint immediately, she said firmly. My nephew served in the Marines. If I'd known Staff Sergeant Callahan was a veteran, especially one with such a distinguished record. "Thank you, Miss Winters," the judge said, then turned to the prosecutor. "Mr. Collins?" The prosecutor cleared his throat. "In light of these circumstances, the Commonwealth moves to dismiss all charges, Your Honor." "Motion granted," Judge Reeves said immediately. "Case dismissed." He paused, looking troubled. "Staff Sergeant Callahan, may I ask where you intended to go after these proceedings?" James hesitated. "Back to my camp, sir, under the Highway 40 overpass." The judge's expression darkened. "That is unacceptable." He turned to his bailiff. "John, get Kevin Morris from Veteran Services on the phone immediately and call Mark Sullivan at the VA Medical Center. Tell him it's regarding a personal favor to me." To James, he said, "With your permission, Staff Sergeant, I'd like to ensure you receive the care and support you've earned through your service. Immediately, not in 3 weeks." For the first time, James seemed uncertain. "I appreciate the offer, sir, but I don't require special treatment." "This isn't special treatment, son," the judge replied. "This is the bare minimum of what this country owes you." From the gallery, another man stood. "Your Honor, Frank Delgado, Delgado Construction. My brother was at FLB Griffin during that attack. If Staff Sergeant Callahan needs housing, I have a fully furnished apartment above my office that's vacant. And I could use a site safety manager with medical training." Before James could respond, more people stood. A woman identifying herself as a VA social worker offered to personally handle his case. The county veterans officer promised to expedite benefits. Officer Daniels, who had arrested James, asked to speak with him about a community policing initiative for veteran outreach. Amid this outpouring, James remained still, his expression unreadable. Years of disappointment and institutional failure had taught him to expect nothing, to rely only on himself. The sudden reversal, from defendant to honored veteran in the space of minutes, seemed unreal. "Staff Sergeant," Judge Reeves said gently, recognizing the overwhelmed look in James's eyes. "One step at a time. Would you accept Mr. Delgado's offer of temporary housing while we sort out proper VA support?" After a long moment, James nodded. "Yes, sir, thank you." "This court is in recess for 30 minutes, the judge announced. "Staff Sergeant Callahan, please join me in my chambers. There are some calls I'd like to make on your behalf." As James was led away, no longer a defendant but an honored guest, the gallery erupted in conversation. Sarah Mitchell gathered her papers, fighting back unexpected tears. In 3 years as a public defender, she'd never witnessed anything like what had just occurred. Officer Daniels approached her. "I had no idea who he was," he said quietly. "He never said a word about his service when I arrested him. That's often how it is with the ones who've sacrificed the most," Sarah replied. "They don't think they deserve special treatment, even when they're the ones who've earned it." 6 months later, James "Doc" Callahan stood at the podium in the Veteran Services Center that now occupied a renovated section of what had once been the Carson Furniture Warehouse. Eleanor Winters had donated the building to the county specifically for this purpose after learning James's story. The center provided counseling, employment assistance, housing support, and medical referrals, all services James had struggled to access just months earlier. What made it unique was its staffing by veterans helping other veterans navigate the systems that had failed them. James now wore a clean button-down shirt and khakis. His beard was neatly trimmed, and the haunted look in his eyes had diminished, though not disappeared entirely. PTSD wasn't something that vanished with improved circumstances, but regular therapy and properly managed medication had made it more manageable. When Judge Reeves stood up in that courtroom, James told the small gathering of community leaders and veterans, "It wasn't just for me. It was recognition of every veteran who slipped through the cracks of the system designed to support them." In the audience, Judge Reeves nodded. His son, Lieutenant Thomas Reeves, seated beside him in dress uniform. "This center exists because one person recognized another's service and refused to allow it to be forgotten, James continued. But it shouldn't take a judge personally knowing your story to receive the support every veteran has earned. Frank Delgado, who had hired James as his company's safety director, watched proudly from the side. The temporary housing had become permanent, with James now renting the apartment properly with his salary. Our goal with the Callahan Veterans Initiative is to ensure no veteran in this county ever sleeps under an overpass again, James said. No veteran should have to choose between shelter and breaking the law during a storm. No veteran should wait months for medical appointments or benefits they've earned through service. Martin, James's former neighbor from under the overpass, now worked as an outreach coordinator for the center, using his experience to build trust with homeless veterans reluctant to seek help. As James concluded his remarks, Officer Daniels approached him with a newcomer, a young veteran, recently discharged, clearly struggling with the transition to civilian life. "Doc, this is Ryan," the officer said quietly. "He could use some guidance." James extended his hand. "Welcome home, Ryan. Let's talk about your next mission." Behind them, a plaque on the wall bore the center's motto, "No one left behind, on the battlefield or at home." Below it hung James's Silver Star and Bronze Star with Valor, finally displayed rather than hidden away in a waterproof bag. The medals weren't there for James's glory. He still felt undeserving of them. They served instead as a visible reminder to every veteran who walked through those doors that their service mattered, that their sacrifices were not forgotten, and that sometimes, when systems fail, individual recognition and community action can change everything. Judge Reeves had done more than dismiss a trespassing charge that day in court. By simply standing to honor a forgotten hero, he had set in motion a transformation, not just for one homeless veteran, but for an entire community's approach to those who had served. Sometimes, the most powerful act of justice is simple recognition of worth that should never have been forgotten. Love this story? Hit that like button and subscribe to In the Heartlight for more. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.